So let us recapitulate what all have we looked at so far. So we started talking about why adolescence is a very important developmental stage. We also looked at some of the developmental tasks of adolescence. We looked at how several stakeholders or agencies define adolescence. Then we looked at how are risky behaviors defined and why is it important to study risky behaviors. We also looked at several ways in which risky behaviors have been conceptualized. And then we looked at each of these risky behaviors in details, particularly amongst adolescents and youth, and what is the nature and how does it manifest, how does it look like. Now we come to the last leg of this session, because it is not sufficient to just talk about how to identify some of these behaviors or what is the nature of some of these risky behaviors. It's also important to end on a note whereby we need to look at the ways in which as teachers or as adults we can address some of these issues. So the last leg of this session actually looks at ways of addressing some of these risky behaviors. And here I wish to perhaps, give some very, very simple ways in which we as teachers or we as adults can play a role in addressing, preventing, or intervening vis-a-vis these risky behaviors. So I think one of the first objectives of this entire presentation is to familiarize all of us with the range of risky behaviors and the nuances of those risky behaviors and adolescents' reasons for engaging in those risky behaviors, so that, as I said, that we get a better understanding of their worldview as well as are able to empathize with it. So I think that's the first task. Yeah? Without prejudice, without a very ageist kind of a bias, without having a preconceived notion, looking at it from their point of view is very, very important. Right? It's also important that we understand what are some of the risk factors as well as protective factors. What are some of the contexts and correlates, psychosocial factors situated within the individual, within the family, or within the immediate environments of these adolescents and young people that are contributing. Yeah? Because not every time it is sufficient to intervene with the adolescent, but it is sometimes required to actually look at those immediate or maybe distal factors also to be able to design some interventions or preventive measures. Needless to say that it's very important to have a regular dialogue with students or adolescents or young people who are a part of your life. And this also includes developing some kind of a comfort also and developing a language which is very, very youth friendly and not very, preachy. It's not a very sermon oriented, not telling them what to do kind of a language, but a very, very youth friendly, egalitarian kind of a language. Very important for all of us to update ourselves about new developments in adolescence world. This also includes getting us familiar to technology, what is happening, yeah, and also getting familiar to digital spaces and social media. Staying connected to your child or to your student and constantly, keeping an eye, a very, very close eye without sounding very overpowering, judgmental is also extremely important. And one of the reasons for holding this session is to, through this very careful dialogue and careful kind of a communication, identify some of the warning signs of these risky behaviors as early as possible so that intervention also becomes very, very easy. I just want to take a few tips, and again, just as I said that the list of risky behaviors was not exhaustive but merely illustrative, similarly ways of addressing adolescents' engagement or victimization because of these risky behaviors, how to address those. Whatever I'm talking about is not an exhaustive list but is an illustrative list. So I think apart from dialoguing, apart from familiarizing oneself with adolescence world, it is also important, and having regular conversations which are very, very open. Some of those conversations may be uncomfortable for us, but it is important to hold those conversations. Another kind of conversation that we need to have with adolescents is also about safety, right? So when adolescents are particularly talking about their experiences of victimization or being at a receiving end, it is important for adults to help them through a gentle but a sustained process label some of these experiences of victimization as violence. A lot of times adolescents themselves are confused. Is this violence or is this not? Right? Those who are initiating and those who are receiving also. The ones who are initiating may minimize, justify, or perhaps distort and say that this was just fun, this was friendly banter, this was what boys do. So it is important to identify these behaviors and label them. And for victims, far more important to be told that this is violence. It is also important to tell victims that they are not responsible for the violence, and violence under any circumstances is not justifiable. Right? This applies both to victims as well as those who perpetrate violence. For those who perpetrate violence, it is also, when we are talking to them, it is also important to distinguish between identity and behavior. Just because one perpetrates violence doesn't mean that you become perpetrator. There is more to the person's identity. So it is important to focus on the behavior and what can the adolescent do in order to not engage in these behaviors, right? For the victim, it is important to validate victim's feelings by saying that, I'm glad that you showed this courage to talk to me. You can always talk to me, and the abuse is not your fault. I think it is very important. As teachers, it is very important for us to have a list of referrals because not everything can be transacted by us. Maybe you require a larger support system, a task force, which can help you, right? And sometimes the teacher's role and the role of a therapist are also very, very conflicting, and therefore you may not be the best suited person. Maybe you are there to identify, to provide early support, and then to refer. So these three could be the roles that you could play: early identification, providing necessary support and safe space for adolescents and young people to talk about, and then the refer. But for that, you need to have a good referral list. I think one of the homeworks for all of us is to create a list of helplines which is very, very adolescent friendly, perhaps which is very, very, multilingual and credible, yeah, that you can refer adolescents to. And also a list of other organizations. These could be child guidance clinics or de-addiction centers or relational support centers. Whatever are the needs for adolescents in this particular age group, you need to have a list of these services. It's also important, particularly given the increased digital dependence amongst adolescents. Adolescents are actually entering this world without having necessary protection mechanisms or having the understanding of what kind of world is this that they are entering into. And therefore, teaching online safety is also important. Creating conversational opportunity whereby, you can talk about some of these rules. And I have actually adapted them from chat safe guidelines, which are prepared by this Australian organization called Origin, and you can visit their website and see. But these are very, very useful guidelines that you can transact or talk about with adolescents in your classes, or you can ask them to go through this website and read. And you can see that these are very, very simple tips that can keep you safe in this digital world. And one of the last ways in which you need to have perhaps conversations is about suicide and self-harm. I have talked about that it is also one of the risky behaviors that adolescents engage in, right? And teachers themselves are very, very uncomfortable talking about it. So if you look at the right-hand side box, this is what an adolescent or youth may be thinking when one is going through a lot of mental distress, or one is thinking of suicide or self-harm. That the adolescent may think that I don't know how to explain what's going on. I don't know whether I will be perceived as a weak person or a mad person, or people will understand me, or will I be a burden, or will I be perceived as an attention seeker. The teacher, on the other hand, is perhaps worried about opening up space for these issues, because you're worried about, what if I'm wrong? What if I open up something that I can't close? I don't have the competency to do that. Yeah, is it okay to talk about such personal issues? And what if I break something instead of mending it? Right? But when you are thinking about it, there is an adolescent who is waiting actually for someone to perhaps talk to them and open up a space. So here are a few do's and don'ts when adolescents engage in one of the risky behaviors, which is about engaging in suicide or self-harm. These are some of the things that you can do. Yeah, let's start with don'ts. Yeah, don't pretend that it does not exist or trivialize. Don't tell people that cheer up, nothing. I mean, don't give them your stories about how you conquered or somebody else conquered. Your formula is not going to apply for everybody. Don't induce guilt that if you do this, what will your parents think, right? Don't make it about your story. Don't tell them your heroic stories. Don't act in a condescending and judgmental way, or threaten them that if you do this, I will talk about. Maybe you will have to breach confidentiality, but do it in a gentle and consensual way. Instead, what you can do is be there, ensure safety. First thing that all of us need to do as teachers is ensure that the adolescent is away from all means that one is using to, perhaps engage in self-harm and suicide. Listen empathetically, not with a viewpoint of lecturing or telling them how to live their life. Create a safety plan, link the adolescent to support systems, and most importantly, refer the adolescent to professionals. That is very, very important. Right? I think here are some of the tips. Many of us believe that asking about suicide is planting an idea of suicide into people's mind. Research exactly shows a contradictory finding that because you ask, many suicides are averted, right? So it is very, very important that you create that kind of a space for adolescents. Yeah? Some of the other things that we can do is, when adolescents are engaging in risky behaviors, we can have a very open dialogue with them about the consequences of some of these behavior, but not with a hidden agenda that, eventually they will see my point and therefore I'll start lecturing. Nobody is going to listen to lecturing. This is not an adolescent brain who is wired for that also. Working out some consensually agreed upon rules, talking about values which are important for the adolescent also. Sometimes actually anchoring adolescents in their values which they have agreed upon in the past and which they have found useful also is a good enough reminder to bring them back and to keep them grounded in those values. Teaching some life skills. Yeah? And I'm going to talk about, for example, there are many programs that are launched by Government of India. For example, one of the biggest programs is Rashtriya Kishore Swasthya Karyakram, or Adolescent Health Program. The Ayushman Bharat program also has now talked about school health program and being exercised or implemented in all schools and perhaps educational institutions. You can hear about the ministry actually promoting helplines in several of these educational institutions. So life skills is a very, very important way, and it is a preventive way. You don't have to wait for an adolescent to engage in risky behavior, but this is actually intervening much earlier. So these skills could talk about problem solving, how to refuse peer pressure, how to regulate your emotion, how to deal with everyday stressors, how to form healthy relationships, how to express one's anger, anguish, frustration. I think having conversations, and there are lovely resources actually created by many of these organizations such as WHO or UNFPA or UNICEF. There are wonderful films also which are created. There are some great manuals which are created by ministry only, which are life skills manuals and which are available on the government website. All of us can go through those, that have very interactive ways of teaching these life skills and not through typical lecture method also. Helping adolescents not only to actually be linked only with that peer group which is engaging in risky behavior, but helping them widen their social networks. is also very important. Working with adolescents can't stop with only adolescents. Maybe you have to engage in other agents of their ecosystem, which includes family, community, or maybe extended other, important systems in their lives, maybe their peer system also. So that is very, very important. What is it that you are doing as individuals as well as an institution to channel or to provide opportunities for adolescents to channel some of those energy into constructive ways is also very important. What are the support mechanisms which are created individually by teachers and at an institutional level? Is there a counseling center? Is there a peer support group? Is there any kind of a sort of a space for adolescents to talk about their emotions, not necessarily when they feel frustrated, but on a regular basis also? Do you have a good referral directory? It is extremely important that even though our role is that of a teacher, you are connected to adolescents, their emotional worlds. They look up to you, they will trust you with some of their deepest emotions also. So you need to have a referral directory whereby you can refer in case you find it very, very overwhelming, right? Framing, initiating a dialogue within your college or educational institute to create youth-friendly institutional policies that support young people in their attempts to move away from risk-taking is also very, very important. And while the teachers or the faculty members are doing it, it is very important to create spaces for faculty members also to feel supported, because it can be very overwhelming to engage with adolescents who are engaging in risky behaviors. It's not an easy job. To refrain your judgment, to not feel tempted to report or to lash out. In order to show that restrain or refrain, it is very important that you need that support also. You need spaces whereby you can discuss these issues, or you can seek support for your well-being also. So I think these are some of the ways in which adolescents' risky behaviors can be can be sort of addressed, and teachers can play a role. To conclude, it is, as I said, not just important to intervene when the problem has arisen, but it's also important to do something to prevent the problem. Right? Prevention is far better. Given the costs involved and minimal resources involved, all of us always engage in intervention because prevention feels like a very costly affair, right? But at the same time, all research shows that prevention is far cost effective than intervention. So it could be a school or college based prevention, it could be community based prevention, it could be engaging families if that is a possibility, and many new innovative ideas of using technology for creating prevention based programs have come up. So some of these very innovative programs can be found particularly in the area of mental health on websites such as Mental Health Innovations or Mental Health and Psychosocial Networks. You can find various programs which are actually evidence-based, which are working with adolescents, and which can be implemented in a very, very cost-effective manner, have been documented on some of these websites. You can visit them, and maybe some of those will give you an idea about which kind of prevention or intervention programs you can start within your institution. With this, I wish to actually thank all of you for your patience and for your engagement in this session. And my best wishes for your journey and for your work with adolescents and young people. Thank you very much.